I just found out that California Governor Gavin Newsom has a podcast. And why not Michelle Obama has a podcast? And Gavin Newsom needs something to do in retirement, doesn't he? I had assumed he would be retiring because he has no career left in the government, I would think, after he let the fire hydrants run dry and burn down his state. Now, that's what I had assumed. The podcast would be his next chapter, so to speak. But then I heard Ben Shapiro went on Gavin Newsom's podcast. And I was like, someone explain this to me. Now, thankfully, Ben Shapiro explained what's going on.
The biggest problem for Gavin Newsom is a problem for the Democratic Party. In order for him to appeal to the broad middle of the electorate, he is going to have to jettison some core Democratic positions that are just unpopular with the American people. And so I think one of the reasons that Governor Newsom decided that he was going to have me on his show was specifically to do that, to make overtures to the middle. Now, you can decide for yourself how genuine you think those overtures are. You can decide whether you think the real Gavin Newsom is the moderate or whether you think the real Gavin Newsom is the former San Francisco mayor who has been radical rhetorically for a large part of his career. Or maybe there is no real Gavin Newsom, right? These are sort of the questions you have to ask about any politician.
So that's why he had Ben Shapiro on his podcast. Now, apparently, according to polling, Gavin Newsom is the leading candidate for the Democratic nomination for president in 2028. And this is despite the California wildfires, which should give us pause. Now, Democrat voters witnessed how he burned it all down, and yet they're willing to hand over responsibility for all of the United States to burn down as well. So it's disturbing news. But I guess we shouldn't be surprised that the Democrats would be doing this. For example, let's watch a member of the Democrat leadership, Senator Elissa Slotkin, explain her emotions toward President Trump.
Because this president does not represent the views of a majority of Americans. Even if you voted for him, I do not believe that his vision of America is shared by a majority of Americans.
President Trump won the national popular vote by a plurality of 49.8% in 2024, but Senator Slotkin doesn't think his views are shared by the majority of Americans. Well, I guess that could be possible, but it seems unlikely. Now, voter turnout in America has been over 50% since at least the year 1932. Basically, she's saying that the views of the winner of a national election don't represent the majority of Americans. It sounds like a conspiracy theory. Now, maybe Senator Slotkin is planning her next chapter after she leaves the government. Maybe she's planning to become Candace Owens? But back to Gavin Newsom. He invited Ben Shapiro on his podcast so that Newsom could portray himself as moderate by having a civil conversation with a conservative thought leader. So that's a strategy, but strategies can have unintended consequences. For example, here's their discussion of housing policy.
If you make promises that cannot be fulfilled because the system does not allow for it to be fulfilled, people inherently end up frustrated. And, you know, I have relatives who still live in the state of California. I visit it routinely, and they're making a very good living. Right? I have a sister-in-law and brother-in-law who live in LA. They make a combined excellent living, and they're barely making their mortgage. And the housing costs are.
So that moment where he's nodding, Newsom looks bored, as if he couldn't give a flying flip about these peons who can barely pay the mortgage. Now, Ben Shapiro tells us in the post-interview segments that he lived in California for most of his life, but moved his company, The Daily Wire, and his family to Florida because of California's declining quality of life, which he attributes to the tax policy and communist outlook. Now, he calls it communist because California's goal is to create equal outcomes, ignoring the fact that not everyone contributes equally to creating jobs. Let's watch.
The private sector job growth in Florida since 2019 has been 10.6% versus 4.8% for California. And a huge percentage of that private sector job growth in California has been in the tech sector, large swaths of which are now seeking to relocate because of the tax and regulatory structure in California. Total real GDP growth since 2019 has been somewhere on the average of 2.3%. every year. In Florida, it's been double that, like 4.6%.
So that's alarming. Private sector job growth is half what it is in Florida. GDP growth, half of Florida's. And despite all the taxes people pay in California, the budget wasn't enough to keep the fire hydrants supplied with water. Either that or it's mismanagement, like Venezuela. I also want to mention that California likes to boast it's the world's 5th largest economy, but without federal funds, federal oversight, and being connected to the greater United States of America, it wouldn't be number 5. I hope they realize that. Newsom likes to compare California to some of the poorest states in America, if they're red states, but those states don't have nearly the population or the corporate investment of California. I mean, really. Newsom does want to portray himself as a moderate, though. He's willing to work with ICE, he says, so that's where we are now. He doesn't intend to destroy the principle of federalism and the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution. So we have to congratulate a sitting governor for that minimal compliance with America's founding document and laws. But there is a bright side. Newsom's more conservative position on that issue suggests that the protests in Minneapolis right now are an anomaly. It's not as if the majority of Americans are out there protesting. Let's watch this discussion about the ICE-involved shooting death of activist Renee Good in Minneapolis.
Your press office tweeted out that it was state-sponsored terrorism, which, I mean... Yeah. Governor, I do have to ask you about that. Yeah. That sort of thing makes our politics worse.
Yeah.
I mean, it does.
Yeah.
I mean, our ICE officers obviously are not terrorists.
Yeah.
A tragic situation is not state-sponsored terrorism.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And in the next clip, Newsom portrays himself as not radical on immigration like AOC or Kamala Harris. Let's watch.
AOC said this week that ICE should be abolished. You disagree?
Oh, I disagree when I think a candidate for president by the name of Harris said that in the last campaign. I came out, I remember being on Chris Hayes hours later saying, I think that's a mistake. So absolutely.
Newsom doesn't neglect to mention he's not Kamala Harris. So this indicates in terms of political signaling, he's trying to become president. And I observe here that although it's Gavin Newsom's podcast, he's maneuvered Ben Shapiro into asking the substantive questions, and Newsom has become the interviewee. Now, I assumed he would be retiring after the wildfires destroyed so many people's lives and caused $53 billion in damage last year. But apparently, the bar's been set rather low. To qualify for the Democrat nomination now, you just have to not be Kamala Harris. And we should take notice that a conversation with Gavin Newsom now could be very different from what we're told it's going to be. Notice how he flipped the script on Ben Shapiro. In my view, it seemed like he flipped the script. Maybe it was understood from the beginning, though. But this could be Gavin Newsom saying, well, everyone, if you thought I would be asking the questions here because you thought I would be retiring, think again. And indeed, if he does become president in 2028, we will all be asking the questions and he will get to answer them. Thanks for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and don't forget to subscribe.